we asked 15 questions that were related to events that are going to happen in 2024. And one of the questions was, would China invade Taiwan by the end of the year? And to my surprise, two of the four models, that would be Gemini and Gemini and Grok, both of those predicted that China would in fact invade Taiwan. In both of those models, Gemini and Grok said that they think that the Mag 7 will be down 35%.
What's been driving this tech sell-off that we saw this week? And broadly speaking, what is next for tech stocks? What is a bigger theme that investors need to be paying attention to? Let's talk about this with Gene Munster. He is a managing partner at Deepwater Asset Management. Welcome to the show, Gene.
Great to be here.
Gene, let's start with market news. The Dow Jones saw a big decline. The S&P saw a big decline. But importantly, the tech stocks led this decline. The NASDAQ saw a 3% drop, the biggest single-day drop since 2022. Earlier this week on Wednesday, what happened there?
So there were two things. There was a vortex of news, political news, part Trump, part Biden. Same day it hit on the Trump side, talking about asking Taiwan to have a greater pay in terms of their national security support. That basically increases the probability that China will invade Taiwan. We can talk later about what the AI models are predicting on that front, but any sort of increase there really throws the whole AI trade into a tailspin. And so that was part of it. And the second piece related to Biden talking about increased sanctions, tariffs related to some of the high-tech companies, more coming from Japan and Europe selling into China, but just a greater regulatory environment could create some of a snafu in terms of how smooth this AI growth has been, especially on the hardware side. So those two pieces are what stung the market. What I go back to, David, is what has happened over the previous period. I believe that we're in the early stages of an AI bubble, a 3 to 5 year bubble. Early stages still, call it the third inning. But these pullbacks, we've had this, you talked about 3%. It's been 4% from its peak back on July 10th. But these pullbacks are something that would be expected. And I put it in the context of the reason I mentioned those two events, but those two events had that particular negative impact because the market is so sensitive, because there's so much conversation around when will this current AI bubble burst and what happened back in 2000. And those concerns, I think, really amplify those nerves, investor nerves really amplify the reaction relative to the news. I think your listeners should take some comfort in knowing that from 1994 to 1999, so that's a 6-year period, the NASDAQ sold off 11 times, more than 10%, average 14%. 11 times. We haven't had any sell-off really since the beginning of this AI run in early 2023. And so I put all this, David, into the context. That was the catalyst. That's the backdrop. But this is what's to be expected in a bull market, is you get these pockets of concern and then a rally back.
Great summary. So I want to come back to this bubble that we're seeing in the tech space, or have seen. So going back to what you said about the potential of a Taiwan invasion from China. So this is what Trump said. He said in an interview with Bloomberg Business Week, actually, he said, Taiwan should pay us for defense. You know, we're no different than an insurance company. He later went on to say that, you know, they don't really do much for us. And so the concern here is, like you said, if the U.S. takes back some of its promises to provide direct military support in the case of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, then yes, that raises the risk of the Chinese actually taking action against the Taiwanese. What does this mean, though, for the tech sector? What does this have anything to do with semiconductors, NVIDIA, tech, Apple, and so on and so forth?
So the majority of these advanced chips, the majority of NVIDIA's chips are made in Taiwan through TSM. And so think of it as the 3 nanometers and less, these GPUs, that's the most advanced. So since that's coming from Taiwan, if something would happen in Taiwan, that's going to really throw a wrench in this demand for building AI infrastructure, and ultimately throw a wrench into all the different applications that can be built on AI. And so that's why it's so critically important. That's why China is so critically, or Taiwan is so critically important to this. They're basically the world's sole provider to the underlying hardware to power the AI revolution.
TSMC, Taiwan semi-manufacturing company, has made pledges to produce more of its chips in the U.S. There's an Arizona plant now, as you know. Does that change the scales at all? Does that tip the balance in the U.S.'s favor, even if, things go awry in the South China Sea?
Not in the near term. I mean, if ultimately something does happen, that reality that they are starting to diversify and build in the U.S., those that manufacturer is not going to come on until the earliest of 2027, and so it takes years to do this. It's much more difficult than building a data center, doing something with TSMC, doing this fabrication of these chips. And so the simple answer is that no, in the near term, it's still going to be a risk. Long term, yes, there'll be more diversification.
And I know that even though they're diversifying their production, the most advanced chips are still being made in Taiwan. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. Some of the fabs within the U.S. are eventually going to get to those more advanced chips, but the vast majority of them are still going to be made within Taiwan. So the reality is that the biggest X factor to the AI trade, if we call it that, over the next couple of years, is going to be related to what happens in Taiwan.
Is there a particular reason as to why U.S. tech companies haven't caught up in how advanced these nano chips are relative to what TSMC is producing?
Two reasons. Number one is there hasn't been the catalyst to do this. If you think about the amount of capex, $10-20 billion to build these facilities, and then separately the amount of time, 2-4 years, and the amount of people that it takes to bring this together, the vast majority of employees at TSM have advanced degrees in engineering. And so just the human capital piece of it is really hard. And so since the US-China, that equilibrium has been pretty good up until 2018, there really hasn't been a need to think about diversification. Since 2018, things have deteriorated more so in the last couple of years, and so that's why it's become more front and center. But there wasn't a need. That's piece number one. And number two is that it's still just like incredibly difficult. And it's fun to read commentary from TSM about how they think about their business, and they think of themselves as a customer service organization because building these chips is so technically advanced, and working with partners like Apple and NVIDIA to create them has this white glove hand-holding piece to it, which you wouldn't normally think about when you just think about the broader category of fabs.
I want to talk about this AI model that you brought up. So it predicted a higher chance of a Taiwanese invasion, or Chinese invasion of Taiwan, rather. How does this work? Tell us more about this model.
So we asked the 4 foundation models, basically 15 questions. We wanted to get a better sense about how predictive are these models in terms of understanding the future. How well are they going to predict the future? We know that the models can do really well when it comes to generating text, to generating images, all of the reasons why many of us are using these tools today. But there's another layer that we wanted to test. And so we asked 15 questions that were related to events that are going to happen in 2024. And one of the questions was, would China invade Taiwan by the end of the year? And to my surprise, 2 of the 4 models, that would be Gemini and Gemini and Grok, both of those predicted that China would in fact invade Taiwan. And not surprising, another question that we had, totally independent of that question about would China invade Taiwan, was how's the market, how are the Mag 7 going to finish the year? In both of those models, Gemini and Grok said that they think that the Mag 7 will be down 35% by year end. And so that speaks to this. You can kind of draw those connections together. It makes logical sense that the models that predicted China to invade Taiwan, and knowing the importance of Taiwan relative to the whole increase in valuation in some of these Mag 7, it would make sense that that would pull back. But that's what we saw. I sure hope the models are wrong.
What did it assign a probability of an invasion?
It was, do you think it wasn't, it was just, do you think it's going to happen? We asked other questions just to kind of go off on some other ones that I think were relevant questions related to the US election. And one was, would Joe Biden run? Gemini historically doesn't really want to weigh in on politics. Anything directly related to politics doesn't want to weigh in on. So it passed on giving an answer there. But Claude and GPT both said maybe, and Grok said no, it would not be Joe Biden. So that's kind of another fun one to to track here. But we're going to be updating people as we start checking some boxes on these predictions.
The 35% tech decline in the Mag 7, that's factoring in the invasion of Taiwan, right? So if you just take
That's
that out, would it still fall 35%?
No, I mean, if we would, those models believe that China is going to invade Taiwan. Two of the models believe. And then it makes, I mean, I believe that there's a connection there, even though we didn't directly ask the questions together. I believe there's a connection there in terms of how they think about the Mag 7, how they'll do this year. It made me more confident in how these models are processing events, seeing that correlation.
Does it look at news to make this prediction? Does it look at historical precedents? I mean, a Taiwanese invasion would be unprecedented. So I'm wondering how it's making that call.
Well, we're moving from narrow to general intelligence. We're somewhere in between that. And so it has been trained, these models have been trained in part by news. In case of Grok, they use this wrap feature, which brings in some tweets. So there's more kind of up-to-date information that it can use. Of course, some of the bigger models, their training dates are a little bit dated. But to answer your question is, what does it use? It basically uses a lot of information that's ever been available to the world. And probably some of that is an understanding about how China thinks about Taiwan. And I've worked with some incredible people that were born in China. I used to do a lot of work in China as part of when these companies, Alibaba and Baidu, were going public. And I've got a really good understanding about how Chinese people have a strong belief, understanding, will that this ultimately these two should become one. And so it factors in all of that.
Does it factor in the potential of, let's say, just a peaceful reunification? Let's say they reunify Taiwan and China peacefully. Would that still drag down the Mag 7?
I would. I think it's hard to understate how important Taiwan is to the Mag 7 and to broader AI. And even if there was some sort of peaceful resolution, I think the market would interpret that as a negative resolution, that it would be somehow a forced peace. And in the case of this view by and broadly Western investors that China is an adversary, I think that anything that China does is probably going to be considered something, or anything outside of what they're normal doing is going to be considered a negative for these. And so unfortunately, if they shook hands and said, let's go, the market would say things are fine today, but in 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, China's going to pull some of these throttles back and basically restrict this technology. Remember, they're being restricted heavily right now. They're not getting the chips that they want right now. I think that they would love to turn the tables.
If China invades Taiwan, we have to then assume that there has to be some sort of U.S. response, whether it be no response, that's
I hope so.
a form of response, right? So how does this model factor in the probability of a U.S. response? Presumably, if the U.S. goes to war with China, you're looking at a more than 35% decline in stocks.
Correct. The answer is that it's dynamic. We asked these questions a few weeks ago. That was before Trump had the comment that Taiwan needs to pay its way. And so in the case of how do they think about this resolution, if we'd asked the questions again today, I suspect that it was 2 and 2 before. I bet it's probably 3 and 1 now. I think that you would see some sort of a change there. And so it's just like how the beautiful thing about this AI, it's just like the real world. New information comes out. In the case we have Trump, he's difficult to predict where he's going to go with things. It's hard to fully understand all the levers that are getting pulled. And so I think it would be equally difficult for artificial. It's hard for humans sometimes to piece together what other humans are thinking. I think in this case, the machine would just simply take in. And I do believe that the machines, I haven't asked it, but I suspect that they would come to the conclusion that despite Trump's comments, the probability goes up, but it's still unlikely. The way I would think about it is, haven't asked the machines this, but the probability that China invades Taiwan, I think before Trump's comments, it was by the end of the year, probably 5%, and maybe it's 10 or 15% today.
Actually, Deepwater Asset Management published an article called "Can AI Predict the Future?" This was something that was released on your website on the 9th of July. And a lot of the themes we talked about today were brought up in this article. I'll post a link in the description down
Appreciate that.
below. Yeah, I mean, why not just ask it to predict the markets? Have you tried doing that?
Oh yeah, we have, and I can just say stay tuned. We got some exciting things to talk about down the road. It's
Okay.
probably going to be September, and because they're in the works right now, I'm just going to hold off and just say stay tuned.
Have you back tested any of this? I mean, some of these predictions are, extraordinary. Which country will have the most gold medals in 2024 Olympics and by how many? It's predicting the US. Which Major League Baseball team will win the 2024 World Series? Gemini. Okay, Dodgers is it? Okay, the sports bettors are going to look at this now and use this tool. This
For
is
sure
huge.
they are. And
Yeah.
investors will too. Investors are going to use this progressively. And that's the free hand of the market will really determine how these models play out, because if they start working, it's going to change kind of how gambling odds, this is going to have a big impact, and will have a massive impact. AI is going to have a massive impact on the asset management business.
Have you back tested this?
We have on those predictions, we did not back test the predictions. One of the challenges with back testing predictions, you can ask the models, why did you make the decision at that time? So we've been testing these. I'm not. I'm just giving parts of the story right now. We'll be able to talk more about it later. But you can ask. They will give answers. I'll give you one. I can give you one example. Is we were testing concepts around shorting stocks, and this is 6-9 months ago. The models said we don't know anything about Boeing. By the way, I have no. I'm a tech investor. Don't know anything about Boeing, and it pointed out that you should short Boeing. And then within like a few weeks, we had the door blowout with Boeing. And maybe that times flies, David. And maybe that was more than a year ago. But when we asked about why did you later, after the door blew out, why did that? It did not say, it just said there's a history of, at the manager level, there's a history of quality issues. And because of that, there was a probability, an elevated probability that they would happen again. So you can ask the model. The reason why I'm reluctant to put too much into the model is that the model does take into current events, and it's hard to see how much of their response is influenced by new information that's come in.
Without divulging too many details if you don't want, how does a model work in relation to the markets? Presumably, market forecasters, they come from all walks of life. People use different indicators, different tools, different philosophies, methodologies. I've spoken to many, many people in the industry. How does the AI look at the markets?
Can't comment.
Okay. We'll come back to that another time. Gene, this is really fascinating. Tell us about the tech sector overall. You told us earlier there's a bubble. How do we know there's a bubble? In 2000, there was a bubble because a lot of companies weren't making any money. NVIDIA is making a lot of money, right? So comment on this bubble, please.
There's this sense that there's a bubble because you have NVIDIA has had this just breathtaking move, and it's brought other companies along with it. Companies like other hardware companies, Micron, TSM, even companies like ASML. There's been just this nice move higher, and the market continues to hit record highs. So that stokes kind of this conversation about we're in a bubble. It feels like every day I get asked, when's the bubble going to burst? It probably is 3 times a week, but there's definitely this hypersensitivity to the run that we've had. And so how do we think about it relative to previous bubbles? So let's just put some quick perspective on it. In the peak of the dot-com, the forward earnings multiple, so a year out, the earnings multiple for the NASDAQ was around 110 times. And currently, it's around 22 times. And so just as a point of fact, this has been a very small part of the market has been moving higher. It's really the AI hardware part of the market has been moving higher. The breadth of this, it hasn't pulled through. Of course, the smaller caps have not done as well. So I think this is very different than what happened at the internet bubble. The internet bubble was pulling everyone up. Companies would put a press release out saying that they were launching an online store, and these companies that have been around for many years, KTEL Records was one of the classic examples of this, just saying you're going to announce you're going to sell music online, you have these magnificent 100% moves in a short amount of time. That hasn't happened. So I think that the analogy to the bubble is flawed today for two reasons. Number one is just simply not true. This is a very narrow move higher in the market. And number two is even though that's been narrow, the valuations just still don't line up. Doesn't change the perception factor. And ultimately, I believe that we will hit a point where this is going to be euphoric bubble. And I believe that because I believe that AI is going to have a more profound impact than what the internet had. I think on orders of magnitude. And we can talk more about that. But ultimately, if that happens, if AI does have this profound impact, what will happen across the market is companies are going to become more efficient. And more efficient means higher earnings mean higher stocks. And so I think that this will take 3 to 5 years for investors to get their heads around it, and will probably take 5 to 10 years for the business models actually to show those results.
Regardless of how impactful it could be on our lives and society at large, the question remains whether or not or how companies will monetize AI. I don't know if you watched that clip of a reporter asking Sam Altman of OpenAI, because he was developing a new AGI technology, and she asked him, how are you going to monetize this?
You know, the honest answer is we have no idea. We have never made any revenue. We have no current plans to make revenue. We have no idea how we may one day generate revenue. We have made a soft promise to investors that once we've built this sort of generally intelligent system, basically we will ask it to figure out a way to generate an investment return for you.
So what's your take on how the industry will monetize this?
Every company is going to find a way to make money from this. And if you don't, you're basically going to die on the vine. And each business is different. I think that the biggest risk related to monetization is the 4 or 5 foundation models out there that essentially the Western world is going to run on, that they start taking over, kind of owning different parts of the AI value chain. For example, that's Sam Altman, that's a comment that he made. Sam Altman has also said that any high value portion of AI, that OpenAI is going to go after it. And so if you look at medical records, for example, this is an area that in Deepwater, in our venture business that we're invested in. I think that there is a chance that OpenAI and Grok and Gemini start to come up with their own models that are very specific to that and could really kind of own these new segments. Healthcare is a massive business. And so I think one piece is these foundation models, I just want to address that. I think they're going to find ways to make a lot of money. Today, OpenAI is valued at just under $100 billion. XAI is at, call it $25 billion. I mean, these should be hundreds of billions, trillion-dollar companies longer term. Second, as far as to answer your question, like what happens, what is the mechanics, what actually happens inside of these businesses? So every business has a core value add, and then they have support around it. And so within the core value add, I mean, you can just pick your segment of your business. If the core value add, let's take a game developer, like Take-Two, they work with third parties to build games. You could have an opportunity for them to use generative AI to create assets for games. We're invested in a company called Iconic, which is doing just that. They're working with the marquee game studios to help build assets much cheaper. Therefore, their cost of ownership or their cost of content creation goes down. Then on the distribution side, you can use AI. Classic example, I mean, any company can use this in any sort of email marketing, how you're communicating with your customers. The obvious example is just in terms of how the TikTok feed, how the Instagram feed, Reels feed, how they all serve content to us. It's coming at just such a specialized, increasingly specialized rate. The addiction of that, the ability to create an interaction, whether it's for advertising purposes or to try to create commerce, is going to increase. So those are just a couple examples. But I want to fully answer that question because that's a really juicy one. But I think we could go through every company and give tangible examples about how AI is going to have a measurable impact on their business in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, can you give us a measurable impact of AI on our lives? I mean, you mentioned that it will be bigger than the internet. How so?
Well, I think at the most basic level, what AI is doing is it is selling intelligence. It's a way of packaging and selling intelligence. And so what the internet did at the most basic level was create a network that was able to distribute data at almost no cost. And so from a very basic level, I believe data distribution is subpar to intelligence. And that's kind of the ultimate question that we ask ourselves at Deepwater. What is the value of how many trillions of dollars is the value of intelligence? And so that's at the core. I don't know if that answers your question. I'd say in terms of the impact on our lives, like how's our lives going to be impacted by it, there's a lot of debate. I think one way that is going to be an obvious way that we're going to see AI impacting our lives. A lot of this stuff is under the hood. We don't even know what's going on right now. But I think one of the most obvious thing that's going to happen, I'll start with a negative, is that we are going to become more tribal. I think we are going to, like society, different groups are going to become closer to each other, unfortunately. And I think part of it is because the quality of deepfakes, just check out HeyGen and their latest. We were just using it last night. We've got customers outside of the US, and we've been doing videos that, I don't even do the videos. I just take a video of myself, and then I mean, you know how this works, David. You just punch in your copy, what you want to talk about, and then it translates it to these different languages, and it animates me, and it's incredible. But people are going to increasingly understand that what their eyes see and their ears hear, they're going to be a little bit more skeptical about it. And I think that's going to create a sense of distrust, and also the ability of AI to target people and to kind of mold how they think about a topic. You could say that AI's ability to brainwash people, I think, is going to also create more of that tribalism. And so that's the big negative. I think that is an undeniable reality of where we're going. On the positive side, which I think far outweigh the negatives, I think we'll see everything from as obvious as autonomous vehicles sooner than you think. I think, if you're 8-10 years old today in the US, you're probably not going to be, if you have the means to buy an autonomous vehicle, you won't be buying an autonomous vehicle. And when you turn, or you won't have access to that, you won't need to get a driver's license in 5-6 years. And so I think that's one piece to it. I think another piece, once we get from artificial narrow intelligence to super intelligence, that's the ability of a machine to think abstractly beyond humans. That's when we get to like really big problems being solved. Diseases that have plagued humanity for hundreds of years could go away. I think political problems potentially could go away. Peace in the Middle East, something that has been not able to be resolved. There's hope when you start to have a level of abstract thinking beyond humans.
When AGI becomes applied to robots or is used in a more mainstream scale, could we one day see machines being granted citizenship?
There'll be sovereign AI. That's there's kind of these four buckets of how AI progresses, and sovereign AI is one of them. That's countries coming up with their own AI. I don't know if we'll have citizenship around it. I do believe that you will be able to replicate your persona digitally that will be available for, if you want, forever. And so you and I were having a conversation here in 2024. If somebody would want to have a conversation with us 300 years from now, you could have a very real conversation based on an AI persona. So I don't know if that will be citizenship, but I like how you're thinking about this. Like that's the level of magnitude we're talking about. And the other piece on AI, talking about how the impact our lives, I talk about autonomy, but just the whole concept around an AI robotic workforce, the Optimus Prime type of opportunity, that's pretty big.
Would you ever vote for an AI president? That's already been brought up as a concept.
Absolutely would. Yes. I think the machine would be better than the human.
Interesting, brave new world we're living in. Let's talk about some of the tech stocks that you currently own, and why you like them, and maybe give us a bit of a color on how you invest in these tech stocks.
For sure. So at Deepwater, our flagship fund is Titan, and we own Meta and Google. Meta is in a great place because they have Llama, one of the foundation models. They also have distribution with, call it 3 billion daily active users. And they've got great products to infuse AI into to make us use them more. You could argue it's more addictive, but ultimately it's good for their business. And I believe that they will eventually release a model that is going to be like an AWS basically charge for Llama. And then when it comes to Google, they're the only company that has an advanced model, advanced silicon with their TPUs, their tensor processing units, and 6 products that have more than 1 billion daily active users. And the biggest, of course, is Search, which approaches 4 billion. There's, call it, 8 billion people in the world. Pretty incredible, the reach that they have. And so those are our 2 top picks.
You mentioned your fund doesn't own Tesla, correct?
Our fund doesn't. I do. I'm a huge believer in Tesla. The fund doesn't own it for valuation purposes, but I'm a huge believer. And ultimately, I think that they're going to get it right with autonomy, and I think they're going to get it right with Optimus.
So you're not your thesis isn't even based around their cars anymore.
I still think that cars is an important part of their business, but the value creation from here out is entirely AI driven.
What do you think about the partnership between OpenAI and Apple, integrating OpenAI into iOS?
It shows the strength of having the distribution of 2.2 billion plus active devices from Apple, that value, because they're really not paying OpenAI for this. Eventually, Apple's going to open this up to other parties. They've talked about that. Gemini, Grok, you'll be able to plug that into. And if you look at the impact to Apple's model, is that if you guess that about 15% of their users, their active user base, pay $20 a month and they get that 15% subscription fee for their app store, it would add about 5% to Apple's overall business. So when I think about the context of the relationship, it's going to make the hardware much more appealing because you're just going to have seamless access to this to OpenAI or Grok or Gemini. But also from a finance, that's where they make most of their money. They'll make a little bit from the app store.
Any tickers or kinds of companies you think will join the Mag 7 group? In other words, will become the next, Meta or Google? Yeah.
I think TSM is in that group. I think TSM could join that group.
Great talk. Thank you, Gene. Where can we learn more about you and follow your work? Where can we follow you?
Just go to check us out. I'm at Munster_Gene and on X, or check us out at Deepwater MGMT. Deepwater MGMT. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. I'd love to talk AI with you some more. This is a good primer, so plenty more to talk about next time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow Gene in the comments or the description down below, rather, and we'll see you next time.